Okay, you ready to go, Your Worship?
Okay, thank you. It being 6:30, I'll call the special meeting of December 7th of Council to order. And we'll start with the roll call. Mr. Kelly Spurls.
I'm here, Your Worship. Thank you.
Mr. Cole.
I'm here, Your Worship. Thank you.
And Mr. Pride.
I'm here, Your Worship. Thank you.
Deputy Chief Finney.
I'm here, Your Worship. Thank you.
Chief Bowser.
I'm here, Your Worship. Thank you.
Ms. Goodwin.
Yes, I'm here, Your Worship. Thank you.
Ms. Miller.
I'm here, Your Worship. Thank you.
And a special welcome to Kieran Miller, our new Senior Manager of Corporate Projects, to her first meeting, hopefully first of many. Mr. Acton.
I'm also here. Thank you, Your Worship.
Mr. Beal.
I am here. Thank you, Your Worship.
Ms. Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship. I am here.
Okay, Mr. Burke.
It's going to feel left out there. Thank you, Your Worship. I'm also here.
Councillor Finney.
I'm here, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Butcher.
I am here. Thank you very much.
Councillor Black. Councillor Black.
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. I'm here as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
I am here. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Michaud.
I am here. Thank you.
Councillor Tower.
I am here, Your Worship. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll now take a motion to approve the agenda.
I move
I will move that.
as approved.
Moved by Councillor Tower, seconded by Councillor Butcher. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, we'll start after a prolonged absence. We'll start tonight with Sergeant Gagné of the RCMP. Sergeant?
Good evening, Your Worship, and everybody. Just to I mean, everybody's been receiving my monthly reports. There's also been the quarterly report sent out by the district planning analyst. I'm also working to get some maybe a monthly report from her for certain statistics, but that may take a while. But for the time being, I think the quarterly reports probably reflect a good part of what we're doing. For November, it's been probably a little bit of a standard month, I guess, for the same pattern we've seen over the last few months. We're catching up from a busy summer, but also the things we've been dealing with mostly are like we've had a few calls of disturbances, and this has resulted in some mischief and assault investigations. But there were no particular trends noted. We continue to attend a number of false alarms and false 911 calls locally, and we continue to have mental health act investigations. I'd say too is a lot of our some of our other calls, like you may attend an assault file, but sometimes mental health is an underlying issue. So we may have 5 mental health calls in a month, but there may be probably more related to mental health. Related to the EMA provincial order, November has been sort of like the last few months. We've had a number of calls from I guess concerned citizens who've calling in some compliance issues that they're noting. However, for the most part, those are dealt with without charges. But they're not outside the norm more here than anywhere else, I'd say. We've also we keep getting files assigned to us from headquarters to check on people that are supposed to be quarantining. So we keep getting those files. Related to traffic, I mean, we keep having since June probably we've had a lot of traffic complaints, but it's the same in Sackville as it is the rest of the district, the rural area as well. A lot of ATV traffic, and I wouldn't say that we have a lot of ATV complaints in Sackville, but adjoining area, it's obviously people are out and about in their recreational vehicles more than they have been previously. We continue to step up a bit of traffic enforcement because of that. So in town, there's been some patrols and stationary speeding enforcement, but we concentrate a lot on we try and concentrate as much as we can in the school areas during school hours, especially in the morning. So, but as a result, we haven't had that many issues related to the schools. Parking seems to be more of a problem around the schools than anything else, especially especially Salem Elementary. Besides that, I mean, I didn't have that much else to say. It's been a while since we got together. I get a good sense from my meetings with Mr. Burke and Ms. Butcher and before Councillor O'Neill that it's good to be here tonight. I'm available for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Paul. We should note that Paul wasn't here before because the RCMP didn't have Microsoft Teams. So now it's good to have you on board.
Yeah, and it's I guess it's a pilot project, and right now I'm attending as a guest, but in the future I'm trying to get my own account set up. So so in the future it might be easier to access me through Teams.
Okay, thank you. All right, sorry, I had a little trouble with mine there. Are there any questions of Sergeant Gagne? Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Welcome back, Sergeant. It's great to have you joining us at our special council meetings again. I'm glad that you folks were able to figure out how you can get connected. I'm just wondering if you could provide some more specifics around the compliance issues. What type of compliance issues have been the majority of the calls or the calls that are coming in? And I know most recently there have been kind of a blitz of the area and compliance-wise with provincial officers as well, and tickets issued. And I'm just kind of wondering if there's some more statistics around that and what type of compliance concerns. Is it large gatherings? Is it not wearing masks? Overcrowding in establishments in town? I'm just wondering about that. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. I guess it's hard for me I don't have any stats on me, and I guess I'd say the stats might be disappointing because it's not like we have a large number of these calls. So it's just anecdotal. I mean, we don't have if we have 10 related complaints in all of November, that's a lot. So it's not like we get a lot of those complaints. 2 of those complaints may have been from a business saying people refused to leave when they entered a business without their masks, and they're asked to leave, and made a kind of resulted in a bit of a disturbance and that kind of thing. But oftentimes we're just dealing with that, for the most part, situation without a charge, and because somebody may get upset, but it doesn't mean that it finds the best response, I guess. And it's very situational and very up to the officer's discretion. And oftentimes people calling in these things don't necessarily are not demanding charges or anything like that, right? So I guess with the latest orange phase that we just got out of, there was a bit blitz with the provincial Department of Public Safety, and we supported them through their operations in the area. And I guess that's the essential word there, is we're supporting them, is we're in a support role more than them, because that's their primary focus, and not necessarily 100% of ours, right? Because we have a lot more issues to deal with than that. But when they're in the area, we're supporting them, and we definitely did issue some tickets related to that. But since the pandemic started, we've issued, it's been very sporadic. I'd say we just issued very few tickets overall, because most people cooperate when the police officer asks them to do something. That's just anecdotally, that's what happens, right?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Evans. You're muted, Bill. Councillor, you're muted.
I don't usually hear complaints about that. I wanted to reiterate what Councillor Michaud said, that it's good to have the sergeant back with us. I remember the good old days when we used to do this in person. I was pleased in previous reports that you talked about increased traffic patrols or traffic surveillance about speeders, because that's talking about anecdotes. That's the most common complaint that I hear from people, and I'm pleased that you're doing that. I would like to just comment on something. For a long time, I would say for at least a year, you have mentioned the number of what you call mental health reports that you have to deal, or cases that you have to deal with. And this is what's behind something which is unfortunately named about defund the police. But what it really means is you want to respond appropriately to these sorts of cases. And guys with guns are an essential part of what the town has at its disposal. But for mental health stuff, it's ideally, or people who are, properly trained for that sort of thing. And I'm just wondering if there is any initiative coming from up the food chain at the RCMP to try to respond to this increased demand for a service which traditional RCMP officers are not particularly well suited to deal with. And I know that's a big subject, but it's something that's on a lot of our minds. And I just want to know if you could speak to it at all.
Oh, well, I guess I'll leave my comments kind of short in a way. I understand what people are saying and everybody's concerns. I guess I'm in my 25th year of policing, and I'd say that underlying mental health issues are related to most of the, at least violence and even property crime that we deal with. And so to say that we get training through experience, I'd say we've had training for a number of years on dealing with folks that are in a crisis. It just came out, especially after the Zansky incident at the Vancouver airport. Yeah, related to I'm trying to think of the right term there, like an excited delirium episode. So we have policy, we've had policy, we've had some training in the area of mental health for a number of years. I don't necessarily, who am I? I mean, training is evolving, continuous. I mean, there's no shortage of it. I'd say, you know, like, I mean, unfortunately, we only hear about the tragic endings from the very few interactions we have with mentally ill people in crisis, right?
Yeah.
So,
all right. Yeah. Anyway, thank you. I don't mean to put you on the spot. I just
no, that's okay.
You know, because you brought this to my attention years ago, and it's something that we collectively are going to have to find a way to deal with. And I think you particularly seem to have the right attitude. Your tendency to stay calm and de-escalate is wonderful, but it's something that needs to be addressed formally. And I just wanted to bring it up. Anyway, thank you very much for your response.
No problem. And if, sir, Your Worship, if I can just say one word about my presence here, I do miss, like Councillor Evans said, I do miss meeting in person and meeting with you folks. I like the insight I get from the community. As you know, Bill, I like talking about things like this. And I'd say that this day and age, more of our officers are more sensitive to that, more than people might think. You know, I honestly think that. And I don't think I'm naive at 25 years of service.
Okay, thank you, Sergeant. Are there any more questions? Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to Mr. English from Mount Allison. Are you here, Rob? I should say, before you start, tonight we're going to be, the documents that we're dealing with and presentations and so on are going to be shared on the screen so that those who haven't seen them ahead of time can read them along with us. So go ahead, Rob.
I'm just trying to adjust my light here so hopefully you can see me. I got a light in the background and anyway, hopefully that's not too bad. There we go. Is that better?
That's better.
Okay. So thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Council, for the invitation. Some of you, all of you may remember that I usually come this time of the year, usually about a couple weeks earlier, to give a little update on what is happening at Mount Allison and things that may be of interest to Council from an operational perspective at the university. So I only have a few slides here. I don't want to take up too much of your time, and certainly then we'll try to answer any questions you have. So next slide, please. So going to really cover two areas, our current environment at Mount Allison, both in terms of our COVID response as well as enrollment and operations relative to COVID, and then more interesting things going forward, and try to focus on our strategy and not just COVID, because as we all know in our organizations that we work with, it's about trying to live with COVID and put COVID on the back seat, not on the front seat. And continue on our lives as well as we can, but of course safely. So next slide. So I'd like to speak briefly about our relationship with the town, as I did last year and the projects we had on the go, but this year instead I'll talk about our large project, the Mount A Sackville community bubble and the community commitment, and how through that commitment and working together, I think we delivered a safe, enjoyable experience for our students returning to Sackville. In particular, all the efforts that went into between our two organizations to welcome our students to Sackville and our community safely. In particular, I'd like to thank Council and the staff of Sackville for their hard work, their support, their teamwork with the staff at Mount Allison, and in particular for the provision of the rink as the Welcome Center. The Welcome Center worked really well from my vantage point, and I think public health was appreciative. You know, we not only did the Welcome Center, but we had some testing going on in the rink, and it was a huge advantage as we did something that, of course, we had to invent over the summer, and we had to adjust on the fly. So. You're all quite aware of our traditional relationships with Resident Computing Services and the Community Liaison Committee and others. But I really wanted to highlight the Sackville Mount Allison Community Belt Bubble concept and what a great example within that of the Welcome Center. So next slide. In terms of this fall term, in the current environment, you may know that we delivered both in-person and online classes. This was a bit unique as compared to other universities in Atlantic Canada, many of whom only delivered online. We did so having gone through 2 orange phases, and I'm glad that, as I suspect you are, that we are out of the second orange phase. We also had some of our facilities open not only to our students, faculty, and staff, but also to the public and general users, as well as some groups. This is also unique compared to other universities and organizations. You may be aware that government entities like the schools are not renting their gymnasiums, that I know of other universities in Atlantic Canada that have not made their facilities available. I'm not saying that we did so in a risky fashion, but we were able to work hard with our teams, our staff, what I mean by teams are our staff, not our athletic teams, to set up the processes to allow those spaces to be utilized. And as well, we took advantage of all the good work by people in the town of having a COVID appropriate environment to do so. So the pool, we were able to get open. Unfortunately, the Sackville Swim Club had to stop twice because of the orange phase. We've had we almost got going with pickleball. The fitness center we opened, and we are in discussions with a basketball group. We're also able to develop and deliver some experiential learning, which is good for us and good for our students. They were very pleased to have an experience in-person experiences to the extent possible, particularly in science, music, fine arts, and our athletic teams. While our athletic teams were playing games, they certainly were practicing and doing various activities. And of course, we also ran residences, around having 660 students in residences with the dining hall, all single rooms, all with their own COVID operational planning protocols. In addition to the engagement with the community, I also would be remiss if I did not say a big thank you to the provincial government, both PEDAL, Public Health, and Public Safety, who were very responsive to questions we had as we developed our operational plan this summer, and also to working with us all fall in creating a safe environment. Next slide, please. So our numbers, which are always of interest to this group, I know, we had an entering class on October 1 of 651 students. That compared to an entering class of 700 students. We had a returning class of 1541 as compared to 1467. Of course, your returning class is a function of your entering class from the year before, and is also a function of how it graduates. And so we benefited this year from a good entering class from the prior year, as well as a lot of hard work over the summer to retain as many students as we could. Certainly when this all started in March and in April, we had concerns about a much poorer enrollment figure for the term. If you go to the Atlantic Association of University sites where this data is, along with the other university, you'll see that every single university, the numbers are sort of all over the place, but there are 2 common things. I believe every single university has had a decrease in their entering class, and every single university has an increase in the number of part-time students. I thought that was interesting that was the 2 themes. Other universities have had ups and downs depending on the categories, or sort of status quo. Dal is a bit like us, not too bad. Cape Breton University's total enrollment is way down because of their international posture. Other universities are down slightly, and some universities, their grad students are way up. So it's very interesting. But those are 2 things that I'm pretty sure are true. Every single university's full-time entering class is down. Every single university's part-time is up. That is not surprising in the land of COVID. Some of those full-time first-year students are probably turned into part-time. Some other individuals may be seeking as an opportunity to pick up some courses. And then of course, it's not a surprise that some of our first-year classes are done, particularly given the degree to which Atlantic universities recruit students from outside the Atlantic, whether it's rest of Canada or international, and that brings about all the travel challenges that COVID has created. Next slide, please. So our ratio of our students percentage in New Brunswick, 45%. This is an increase on a relative basis compared to other years. We were normally running around 40%. Nova Scotia, 25, PEI, that's around the same. Rest of Canada, I believe, is down a bit, and international is actually about the same. We were 12% last year. And so I'm quite pleased with the international numbers. A lot of hard work to build this up by the recruiting team over the last few years, and so we were able to maintain, and a lot of people had signed on. We also recruited international students who were already here. We worked very hard to recruit international students that happened to go to a high school in New Brunswick. And so these are individuals that wanted to stay in Canada and attend post-secondary, and we realized that that's a great market. These students are already like New Brunswick, they're already here. So that's embedded in the figures, in the international figures. The New Brunswick numbers are not a surprise in some ways. I think a lot of students wanted to go to university and perhaps they realized they didn't want to travel. So that's not surprise relative to the others that we see an increase, and not surprised that we see somewhat of a decrease in rest of Canada, because the converse is true. That is that some students would have stayed home in Alberta, British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec. Next slide. So to get off the current enrollment and the current situation, and we'll talk about the strategic plan, but actually I'll speak briefly about an item that's not there, which is winter term. So and I didn't prepare a slide of this, but I think it is important to think about winter term, given we just came out of Orange, that we see a lot of changes going on. We know Christmas is coming up. St. John area had a challenge. PEI has now had some challenges. South End Halifax has had challenges. So we will take the lessons that we learned from self-isolation in September and apply them to how we will do the fall or winter. 2 points. Right now, we will be self-isolating many more students, because our students that returned home to Nova Scotia or will return home to Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Newfoundland will have to self-isolate under the current rules when they come back. We have also decided and have announced today to our students that the first day of classes are scheduled for January 18th will stay as January 18th, but the self-isolation period is going to move for students and residents from Jan 1, Jan 2 base starting date to January 8th, January 9th. We are going to do this by working with our faculty to deliver online classes for the first week online. This will give the students more activities to do while they complete their second week in self-isolation. So a big shout out to our faculty, our provosts, and our deans for working with the staff on this. And 2, it allows us to put an extra week between Christmas and the return of students to residences, which we think is prudent given the current environment. It will require some changes given students have already made some plans related to travel, and we will work with them on an individual basis. But we think the families and the students will appreciate that additional week at home. We think it'll give us more time to deal with anything that may come up. It will provide an extra week of work, an extra week of prep time by staff when they return on Jan 1, Jan 2, or getting ready for the return of students. And most importantly, as I said, it will put 1 week between Christmas, when we are hearing from public health officials, please don't travel and commingle as much as if you may wish to with your families, whether you be a student in New Brunswick or even a student in Quebec or Ontario or wherever it may be. So that information went out today. And I thought the council would be interested in hearing this. This will also mean that the non-self-isolating students returning to residence, the New Brunswickers, will be pushed out again another week and encouraged to stay put until the 25th. So going forward, something a little bit about not COVID, you'll remember that I talked about our 4 strategic pathways last year revolving around extraordinary student experience. These are community-minded university, strengthening academic opportunities, student life, support wellness, and a 21st century learning environment. These are unchanged from last year, and we've made efforts even with COVID in raising money to support these in terms of some hires related to faculty. We have a professor in community engaged learning, but I'll speak mostly about the bubble at the top. So next slide, please. The 21st century learning environment means many things, but it does mean and centers on the revitalization of our RP Bell library. To revitalize that space into a modern library space, innovation center, whatever you may wish to consider it. The words in some ways are not as important as the meaning, and what it is an opportunity, we hope, to revitalize probably the most important space on campus in terms of the heart of the intellectual piece of the campus. It's the physical heart, but an intellectual piece in terms of the library. And so this is a significant project. And when you think of that related to our community engagement piece, we do see how we can use that space to further foster activities that engage the entire community, not just the traditional faculty and student academic community. So we're in the current process called functional programming, which is exactly about determining what functions go into that space. And indeed, you may be aware that on Wednesday night, myself, our librarian, Diane Keeping, faculty member Andrew Wilson, and a couple of others will, with the assistance of Jamie Burke, will be trying to engage with as many individuals as possible in the community about this project. This is the largest capital project, at least contemplated, that the university has ever undertaken. It is complicated but very exciting. And it's not exciting because we're going to rejuvenate physical space. It's exciting because it's an opportunity to imagine and to consider what can be done in that space and what a modern library, a modern innovation center, with all the different activities going on in such spaces, how modern library services are developed, and what that could bring to our campus community and our greater community. So some of you may know about this, some of you may not, and I wanted to give you a heads up because this is a very important and very significant project, and we're really excited about it. And we're doing our best to try to stay focused on it while we deal with COVID. Next slide. So that is my brief presentation, a little bit about this term, a little bit of what's coming up next term. A sincere thank you to the town and town council for all the assistance and the Welcome Center in August and September, and a little bit of information on our 21st century learning space. Deputy Mayor, happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Butcher.
Thank you. So I would like to first make a comment and then ask a question. I'd just like to comment that back in August, I know a lot of people in town, people who live here, were worried about the influx of students. And I'd just like to say thank you for such a well thought out and organized plan that, from my perspective, from the average town people's perspective, really seemed to go off almost without a hitch. We invited so many university students back to our town, and we still maintained a safe place for all of us to be together. And I'd just like to thank you for making that happen. I know it took a lot of planning and organizing over the summer, and it was a wonderful thing, and I look forward to the same thing happening again in January. So that goes to my question. I just want to clarify. I had thought that classes would be starting up again January 18th. So what you're saying is it will still be starting January 18th, but it will be online for the first week? Is that correct?
Correct. So ideally, the non-self-isolators, the New Brunswick students, will stay exactly where they are in Fredericton or Moncton or Albert County, and take that first week of courses where they are. The resident students will not move in on Jan 1, Jan 2. They will move in on January 8th or 9th. And so we will facilitate, if they incur some costs for, say, travel, refunds, having to change their airplane tickets, we will look at helping them out with that way. We want to encourage them to stay put for an extra week in that first week in January, then come for their self-isolation and do their self-isolation like they did in August or September, and then away we go, Allison, to your point, for another term. So we just think, given everything that's changed in the last couple of weeks, that it's the prudent thing to do. We recognize that this is a hiccup for some students, and we will work with them to the best of our ability. And thank you for your comments. I think the shout out really goes to our students. I know not all of them were perfect, and maybe no human beings always are, but mask wearing, social distancing, residences was not nearly as fun this term as it has been in others. We all know this, but I think they deserve a real pat on the back for generally pretty good behavior.
I think you're right, Rob. They taught us, they normalized wearing masks out on the sidewalk of downtown Sackville before the rest of us were quite doing that. So true.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. First, I just wanted to congratulate you and your team in being able to actually grow your enrollment this year. That's incredible. I know back in August when you were first speaking to council, there was that magic mark of 1,500 that you're hoping to be able to do. I have a couple of questions, actually. My first question on this is, what percentage of that 2192 is students who are participating online that wouldn't be here in the community?
Well, there's two parts to that, Sean. One, just because they're online doesn't mean they're not here. We actually have like 50 or 70 students in residence that are 100% online, and they're here for a whole host of reasons. So one of the things we realized that we learned, I think everybody assumed that if a university goes online, the students associated with that university will not come to that university community. I think we learned that's a fallacy. There are many universities in Canada that went 100% online, and the students all came to that community. They just didn't have to go to the campus. That actually created different issues in those communities on off campus. To answer your question, though, how many students, sorry, I don't have it directly in front of me, Sean, I think at least 50% or more, 50% or more of our classes are in person. There is not a huge proportion of students who are 100% online. We have many, many students who are a mix. So I think we may only have about 20% courses that are 100% online, but I could be wrong. The other thing too that I think about is actually for winter term is the degree to which the students' experience with their courses and the degree to which they're online or not will drive enrollment in the winter term and will drive residence occupancy in the winter term. I do have a concern when you talk about our success on enrollment. I do have a concern about winter melt, right? You know, that we have some students who will say, this is just not for me, right? It was not as fun as I thought. I'm going to, on the other hand, I think a lot of students realize if they stay home with mom and dad or their families, there's not a lot of opportunities there either, right? There are not a lot of, let's be honest, there's not a lot of part-time jobs. There are not a lot of volunteer activities. There are not a lot of other things to do. But winter melt is a concern.
No, great. I'm kind of curious, I guess, just more so in regards to seeing how many students we're seeing, in our community and actually utilizing the services in the community in the retail sector and that type of thing. So just get a feel for that. So
including online students. And we have brand new students who couldn't make it for September that want to come in January. So
that's awesome. And I know there had been some layoffs back in the summer with the COVID situation. Where's the staff complement now with the university? Are things back to normal? Or?
Well, I don't know if we're ever going to return to normal. If normal is pre-COVID. So I can tell you that we made all kinds of changes in all sorts, including our team. We did lay off individuals. We reduced hours. We added individuals, added positions. We changed positions. So right now we do have some positions which were laid off come the end of September, and they stay laid off. Generally, there's not many of those. There's less than 10. We also have had more positions. So, for instance, in campus services, our custodial and security, we've had more custodians and custodians than we've ever had, I believe. And we've gone to 24/7 security. Actually, that happened way back in December 2019. We added a resource in computing services. We've added other resources in other areas. So Sean, I would say it's a little bit of everything. Because what COVID told us and saw us is that we had to make a whole number of changes for any number of reasons. And we will continue to make changes. I can think of some positions that we're thinking about trying to add. I can also think of positions that we tried to fill, but we were not able to. So we tried to hire a licensed nurse practitioner in the summer, and we just could not find somebody. That's not a surprise. These roles are in high demand. The same if you were to try to find a technology person specializing in learning technologies. Very hard to find. Right?
Okay, thank you, Rob. Councillor Evans.
Yes, I'm going to. I will say, frame this positively and say I will echo what Councillor Butcher said rather than be cross with her for stealing it. But I wanted to make that point that in the summer, some of us, and I include myself, were a little apprehensive about how the wheels could fall off in September when a whole bunch of people were coming from outside our precious little bubble. And when they arrived, I mean, this partnership that you talked about was so impressive. And the results were so impressive. And I went away at the end of August and was quarantining early on. And when I came out of quarantine, the number of people in town who were wearing masks was up dramatically. And the people I talked to think, as Councillor Butcher did, that this was because the students were modeling that behavior, and it became much more acceptable for people to do that. So rather than the influx of the students being a threat, they actually, I think, helped us start getting used to behaving properly. So that was a real pleasure. The last point I want to make is something I make each year, even in pre-COVID and eventually post-COVID times. I really appreciate you presenting to us and letting us know what's going on up on the Hill, even if it is the case that you're in witness protection or being grilled by the RCMP. I think it's really useful. The university is so important to the town in so many ways, not just economically, but culturally and the volunteering and stuff that goes on. So for us, knowing what you're doing is hugely useful. And the fact that you're doing it this publicly means the word gets out. So thank you for doing this, and I hope to do it again next year.
Well, I hope we do it again in winter because, well, certainly the presentation, but I mean, I think I told one of our teams at the end of August when things didn't fall off, I was waiting for my phone to blow up on the first day of classes and it didn't. I said, congratulations, we've reached the start line. Yeah. And I didn't mean to do it in a way that I didn't mean discouraging. But I think we through the prep with all the different groups and a lot of hard work, we got ourselves through the term. But now we're only halfway through the marathon. Yeah. And so thank you, Bill, Council Evans. But in some ways, the winter will be as challenging, startup or more challenging because we don't have our Atlantic bubble. And we do see some cases even in this place as close as Charlottetown, which anyways doesn't even have the population that Moncton has. So I don't want to be a doomsayer, but we're working really hard to have the same success in the winter term and in the fall term. But I do want to say, to telegraph to the community that we should not be surprised if we end up with some cases, right, in our community, in our campus community, right? We know that that's just statistically will be normal, and other universities in Atlantic Canada have had cases. I think the one piece, the takeaway though, is I think people had this assumption that online meant students will not come. And that actually, if you look at what's happened, like to Halifax, all the students came back to Halifax. They just weren't maybe on the same areas of the Dalhousie campus. Western Ontario, I think, is online, but they are running residences. Queens, they're online, but I think pretty much, but they're running residences. So in many ways, our in-person class delivery gives our students more things to do. Right, and I think it's both academically beneficial, but is also good from a COVID safety perspective. And great for mental health.
Okay, Councillor Butcher.
I just wanted to say that we have already seen from what was put in place in August that we can end up with cases here. But if the protocols and the support is put in place for the isolating and the quarantining that needs to happen, then that's okay if we have cases because they are already isolated. So I hope I'm speaking for the rest of our community when I say that after seeing what happened in September, we have a little more faith in that being able to be done in January safely. So perhaps we will see cases, but hopefully they will be cases that are already following those quarantine protocols. So thank you for making that possible.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Are there any more questions, Mr. Inglis? If not, thank you again, Rob, for coming and presenting this information. Much appreciated.
Okay. All right. And if you're stay tuned on Wednesday night and you want to learn more about our big project. Thank you very much, Council. Appreciate it. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next item. And Lauren Clark from EOS, our Partners in Climate Protection, our Milestone report. Lauren, are you there?
Hi, Ron. Yep. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. I'm going to share my, okay, that works too. I was going to say I'll share my screen, but that's great. All right, so if I want to say, like, advance to the next slide, I just say next slide. Is that how it's going to work? I haven't done one of these before where I'm not controlling the slide. Okay. Yeah, so I'm Lauren Clark, for those of you who don't know me, and I'm the Energy Projects Coordinator with EOS. And the town of Sackville has been participating in, or has been a member of the Partners for Climate Protection program since 2011. And that program is run through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities and is a national network made up of over 350 municipalities, and it exists to help municipalities reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and act on climate change. Next slide. Okay, so this program consists of 5 milestones. I'll just go through them quickly. So the first one is to make a baseline emissions inventory. So the town of Sackville did this. So there's a baseline emissions inventory for the town of Sackville operations, and then for this community of Sackville as well. So there's 2 separate ones, and you basically take a look at the number of emissions that were created by the town of Sackville operations and then by the entire community of Sackville. So that was done for the year 2011. Milestone 2 is where you set emission reduction targets. So I know that the town of Sackville set an emission reduction target of 10%. So they said back in 2011 that they would reduce emissions by 10% by 2021. So that's milestone 2. Milestone 3 is when you create an emission reduction plan, which was done around 2015. Milestone 4 is where you take a look at your emission reduction plan and say, okay, we've made progress on this item. We completed this item. We, are still working on this item. And I completed that last year in the fall of 2019. And then Milestone 5 is where you do another emissions inventory for a different year to assess your progress towards your emission reduction goals. So I looked at the year 2018 for both the town of Sackville and the community of Sackville. And then I compared them, like those numbers, with 2011. And I have some results for you on the next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, back one. Yep. Okay. Is this okay? Yeah. Okay. So this is a map, and I've zoomed in sort of on New Brunswick, and you can just see the municipalities in the area that are participating in the Partners for Climate Protection program. The 3 orange dots in our area are Sackville, Dorchester, and Port Elgin, and you're marked at being at Milestone 4. Milestone 5 will be completed soon. I just have to present results to everybody, do like a stakeholder report, and then submit them to the folks there who will take a look. And I just wanted to point out that Fredericton and Bathurst are the only 2 other communities in New Brunswick so far that have completed Milestone 5. So it'll be really great to have that completed. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of basic climate science, just if anyone's wondering why we're doing this, trying to reduce emissions. This is just showing a little graph of the emission, like the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide over time. So you'll notice the graph on the left goes back quite a few years, 800,000 years, just and sort of looking at the variations of the concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere over time. And then if you'll notice, the colored line goes up quite a bit more than has happened in the past. And then it zooms in a little bit on that line on the right graph and just shows how the amount of carbon in our atmosphere has increased dramatically since the Industrial Revolution. Next slide, please. And if anyone has any questions at any time, feel free to jump in. Okay, so this is the corporate section, which is the town of Sackville emissions results. So during the winter of 2013-2012, the town of Sackville agreed to the goal of reducing emissions by 10%, like I said, from 2011 to 2021. So when I did the 2018 emissions inventory, it showed that overall emissions had been reduced by 31%, which was great. And so the goal has been surpassed 3 years early and by 21% more than planned. And we would like to congratulate the town of Sackville for their efforts. And I'm going to talk about those results in a little bit. And also just say that it would be good to be able to repeat this process in the next couple of years or next year even, just because such a long time has passed between the first emissions inventory and the second. It's not always clear how things were done exactly in 2011. So I just want to make sure that that number is genuine and that your progress can be sort of seen as continued. And you know, that 2018 wasn't like an odd year where people didn't, you know, use as much electricity or something. Just to sort of solidify those results. And next slide. So this is just a graph, and it's just showing sort of the breakdown of the emissions from the town of Sackville. And if you have any questions about that, let me know. Next slide. Could we go to the next slide? Sorry. Oh, Allison.
So I'm not sure if you can answer this question or if maybe it's a question for our engineer. I'm just wondering why our fleet is up in emissions when the rest of our things are down.
Yeah, for sure. So I think the main reason why that is in 2011, from what I can tell, the town of Sackville gave EOS the amount of money that was spent on on gasoline. And so EOS sort of took the amount of money and figured out number of liters of gas burned from that. So I'm not sure that that one is entirely accurate, just because, first of all, it was the amount of fuel used was estimated, and also because all of it was considered to be gasoline, whereas in 2018, I had actual numbers for liters consumed, and also I differentiated between gasoline and diesel because diesel and gasoline have two different emission coefficients. Basically, they produce different amounts of carbon dioxide equivalent. So that's another reason why I would like to sort of repeat the process for 2019. Just because I would like to see, why that is. And I don't think, because generally, as vehicles, as newer vehicles come out, they tend to be more efficient. So you would think that the numbers would go down. It may be because there's a couple of extra vehicles in the fleet. We did talk about that when I met with town staff. So couple different options there, or explanations, I guess. But yeah.
That is correct, Dwayne here. We did add a dozer, we added a roller. There were a few other items that we added, so our fleet number of fleet equipment increased. So that was another reason for that.
Yes, thank you, Dwayne. So this graph is just showing the breakdown in terms of the amount of emissions produced by each sector. So in the PCP Milestone tool, it's broken up into buildings, fleet, streetlights, and water and wastewater facilities. Another category is solid waste, but because the solid waste from town buildings is collected with the community's waste, it's not measured, so that wasn't that's not a number that we could look at, but that was okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is the community sector. So during the same time, the community also agreed to the goal of reducing emissions by 10%. And when I did the emissions inventory, the residential, commercial, and transportation sectors, when I averaged the change there, it's been reduced by an average 28%. So again, surpassed the goal, which is great. Data from solid waste, not super conclusive, just because the data available to me, I'll explain that, but it was sort of different than the data that they had collected in 2011. And in 2011, they actually, I think EOS and perhaps the town had an external consulting firm take a look at solid waste and estimate numbers. And for me, I asked Eco360, the Southeast Regional Service Commission, for some numbers, and they were only able to give me residential solid waste consumption, whereas in 2011 they had also added institutional, commercial, industrial, and then construction waste. They had estimated those as well. So if you could go to the next slide, I think I have, yeah. So for residential and commercial, that's fine. I had data from NB Power and from Liberty Utilities, which is the new name for Enbridge, if anyone's wondering. And then I estimated it's like fuel oil and propane amounts. And there's a decrease there. For industrial, it's a little tricky because in 2011, NB Power gave us data for industrial, but then when I asked in 2018, they initially said NB Power doesn't have any industrial customers in Sackville. And then when I went back and said, well, that's kind of odd because in 2011, EOS got data from industrial customers in Sackville from NB Power. And they said, well, it has to do with proprietary because sometimes there's only like 2 or 3 industrial customers in like a town. So if I give you the amount, it's kind of just like giving you their bills. So I'm not sure whether industrial customers in Sackville that existed in 2011 are now considered commercial, or whether I'm just not being given the numbers. But I wasn't able to compare that anyway, so that's why there's a blank there for industrial in 2018. And then for solid waste, like I said, that you'll notice the number for 2018 is a lot smaller than 2011, which doesn't reflect a reduction in the amount of solid waste. Unfortunately, it's just that I was only able to access a portion of the data that was, and I mean, it was just estimated in 2011, but it really only represents a portion of the total solid waste created by the community of Sackville. Any questions about that in particular? If not, I'll move on. Next slide, please. So one of the reasons for the emission reduction does have to do with the electricity grid. So between 2011 and 2018, the amount of greenhouse gas emissions created from electricity generation changed in New Brunswick. So when you look at the National Inventory Report, which is a report on greenhouse gases that is put out every year by the Government of Canada, it shows you that in 2011, there were 450 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilowatt hour produced from electricity in New Brunswick. And then in 2018, it was down to 300 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilowatt hour in New Brunswick. So that is one of the big reasons why there's been a reduction in emissions. And I just had a little graph there showing you in New Brunswick what the electricity production facilities are. And we can go to the next slide. That would be great. Could we go to the next slide? Oh, thanks. So another reason for a decrease in emissions, the town of Sackville replaced like streetlights with LEDs, which is great. So the lights at the baseball field, parking lot of Visitor Information Center, and the Civic Center. So that contributed to emission reduction as well. NB Power had a program where they were replacing HPS bulbs with LEDs. So that had to do with the reduction of emissions for streetlights, but then town of Sackville did the same thing. I did mention before about replacing vehicles in the municipal fleet with more efficient models. So, a newer vehicle is going to be more fuel efficient. Also, the EMO storage facility uses excess heat from the electric boiler in the Tantramar Veterans Memorial Center for its in-floor heating, which is great. And I know that since 2011, there's been an implementation of the 3-stream waste system. There's been trees planted. Next slide. Oh, yes, Bill. Councillor Evans.
Okay, Lauren, do you know if when the baseline numbers were done in 2011, was that with the new or the current council chambers, EMO, fire station, or was it just before?
No, it was before that.
Ah, so that's a one-time improvement that we're not going to get again.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, because yeah.
Although it's important, the building is much bigger, so it's not, you know, we're doing more with slightly less, I think, because our energy consumption is down.
Mm-hmm.
But still, I was just wondering, because that would be really good if it was done with the same building. But okay.
Yeah, it's kind of too bad that it changed, but yeah, no, it was.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Councillor Butcher.
So I'm wondering, this may not be something that we know at this point, but how are we comparing to other municipalities within New Brunswick? I'm proud that we've done more than 10%, because 10% is kind of cheesy, but how are we compared with others? Are others doing this as well? And are we still a leader?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I haven't looked at other numbers specifically, but I'd be really happy to do that and get back to you on that. I guess I can just say, you know, from the map I showed earlier in the presentation, there are lots of other municipalities in New Brunswick participating in this program. But again, just Fredericton and Bathurst have made it to Milestone 5. And so we're doing pretty well, I would say. The other thing I do want to mention is that this is not sort of like a one and done program. The idea is that you're sort of rewarded for going through each milestone the first time, but the idea is that you go back to your emission reduction plan after making Milestone 5 and take a look and say, hey, like, what will be our next target emission reduction plan, and let's look at the plan and what do we want to change, what do we want to keep doing, and stuff like that. So EOS would be happy to do that, to facilitate that with you guys. That would be great, and we've included that process just very generally in our ETF application. So, and I know that you guys have applied for the climate change coordinator position. So if that was granted, the climate change coordinator would be doing the town of Sackville emissions with you guys, and EOS could still do the community stuff, but we would work together, and yeah, no, I'd be happy to do that for sure. Yeah, but I'd be happy to look at other municipalities and get back to you about that.
Okay. Thank you. I think one thing too we can look at, it might be hard to calculate, but a credit as far as energy goes is the fact that our solid waste is now being used to generate electricity. So we are, I know the Eco 360 is now generating enough electricity to run all their own operations, plus sell some back to NB Power. So it's, and that is, some of that is based on the waste that comes from Sackville. So I don't know if you could calculate that directly, but it seems to be a source of energy credit.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ron. I can look into that as well. Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, thank you, Lauren. Much appreciated.
No problem.
And we'll move on to policy bylaw, and it's Ms. Beal or Chief Bowser.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will start the process. So our policy bylaw liaison meeting was held on Tuesday, December 1st. So providing of water for purposes other than those listed in the water and sewer bylaw was brought forward at our December meeting. Fire Chief Craig Bowser has reviewed this policy, which was passed in 2001. When this policy was passed in 2001, it was passed by name only. There was no number attached to the policy. It was recommended that this policy receive a number. The definition of fire chief, as it does not apply to the policy, be removed. And it was recommended that any request for water other than as described in the water and sewer bylaw be made to the chief administrative officer, and if approved, be filtered down through engineering and public works. Also discussed at that meeting was our street traffic bylaw, which is bylaw number 262, as it pertains to skateboards within the municipality and our speed limits on some of our roads. And this was included in the report this evening just to bring you up to date that this policy or this bylaw 262 street traffic bylaw will be looked at in the very early part of 2021. With regard to the policy that we are looking at tonight, it was included in your package. And if there's any questions to that policy, Fire Chief Craig Bowser will be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions for the fire chief? Councillor Evans.
Well, I thought Councillor Michaud beat me to it. I was just curious about whether or not we have, or it wasn't clear to me what sort of project this would be used for. So could you just give me some examples, if there are any, of people, I guess they'd be major customers for water that aren't, residential or commercial stuff?
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor Evans, your worship, members of council. So we've had numerous requests over the last few years, more specifically for filling of swimming pools, but we've also had requests for construction sites or filling of portable water tanks for numerous residents. So, one of the things we've quickly identified is the fire department as a whole is not in the business of providing water for those types of events. And the other thing to take into consideration is our equipment, our apparatus. We use a foam in our firefighting efforts, and that residue remains within our pumps and our plumbing. So we would actually not be giving just pure water to those sites. But again, we're not in that business.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Michaud.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I guess my question is more so it wasn't in regards to this particular policy, but in regards to the information in regards to street traffic bylaw and the letter from DTI. And I'm just curious, I know council's aware of the letter response back to the Deputy Mayor from DTI. I don't think the public is aware, but apparently from how I read that letter, the municipality has the ability on designated highways to set the speed limit with consultation with DTI. I'm just curious, within that paragraph, it talks about a traffic study and determining number of children, etc. And I'm just kind of wondering, is that a requirement that has to be given back to DTI before we can progress? Or are we able to start the ball rolling in regards to ensuring that Pond Shore, and I think one of the other areas was Queens Road around the schools was talked about in regards to reducing the speed limit there as a designated highway. If this is part and parcel of that, if we have to go through that, or is it something that we can start working at now in order to see us complete this? Because I would hate to see the residents in Pond Shore again have to go through several more months when the municipality may have the ability to effectively change the speed limit within a reasonable amount of time.
I'll say we're going to talk about this or plan to talk about it in more detail next week in our regular meeting, that report you just saw will be part of. But Mr. Acton, do you have anything to add to this?
Sure. Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. Yeah, and in regards to the information in that the clerk had mentioned, that is one of the reasons why we want to do a bit of homework, because this is new to us as well. This letter from DTI, we've never been able to set speed limits, so we're wondering kind of where this came from, what requirements are, what do we have to do, whether we have to get that information back, and we don't have that information right yet, so we didn't want to make any of those decisions without doing some homework, and that's why we're recommending that we take a look at this, we take a look at the requests that were made, and then come back to council. Unfortunately, it probably would be in February because we're already in December and there's no meeting in January, or no discussion group meeting in January, and then, but more than likely that would come in February, and that give us the time we need to collect this information and come back with to council with some more information and some possible recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
This time, very definitely, Councillor Black was ahead of me.
Okay, Councillor Black.
Thanks. I'll reiterate a little bit what Dwayne said, but in our policy and bylaw meeting, we discussed this at length, as well as the possible amendment to the street traffic bylaw with the skateboards. There's a lot of work that needs to be done in order for us to be able to look at all of this. Like Dwayne said, having information from DTI about setting speed limits is a first. So rather than just jump and change a speed limit, there's a lot of things that need to be considered. And to be able to do this properly and do it right, set some precedent and policy is really important at this stage. So we discussed this at length, and we want to make sure that we have everything in place before we bring it back to council for consideration. So I just wanted, as far as a liaison council for policy bylaw, I wanted to make sure that that I said my piece and that we discuss this at length, and we'll have something in February, as Dwayne said.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Thank you. I'm delighted that this is going to be addressed. I was pleasantly surprised but intrigued by the letter, because it seems to require a study be done, and it's not clear to me if the cost of that is entirely borne by us or what standards have to be met. It says the things that need to be measured, but it's not clear, if we do know how many kids are doing it or how much, how it's going to work. So I appreciate what Councillor Black says. We have to do it properly. It's really important. And just to refer to what Sergeant Gagne was saying about anecdotal evidence, I have had reason to drive out to the Midget area several times in the recent past. And when I come back in off the 80 kilometer and set my cruise control to 60, it stacks up behind me like planes at an airport. So obviously people are used to driving much faster than the speed limit. So I can personally validate the problems that have presented to us. And seeing how narrow that road is and hearing about that horrific accident a few years ago, this is something that we should address. So I'm delighted that we are proceeding.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Finney.
My question is directed at to Chief Bowser. In the past, when we had requests for water, who did that go to?
So in the past, the resident would make the request to Town Hall at our Chief Administrative Officer, and then the Chief Administrative Officer would pass that along, whether it be to the Fire Department or to our Engineering and Public Works Department, which would, again, they would determine the quality of water that was required, and they would put a backflow preventer on, and as well as a water meter, so they had actual disbursement of water, so they knew exactly what to charge when the water fulfillment was done.
Okay, thank you. One other question. The thing is, I guess that would go to Michael Beal. The thing is I see it at the end of it, the three things, the 20%, etc. But there was a reduction from $100 to $50. Why was that put in there? I've never seen any time when anybody reduces something.
Mr. Beal?
Sorry, Your Worship, just going to that section there. So yeah, the $100 was for the fire department. The $50 was for the water department supply. And the reason being the $100 was for the fire trucks, which are much more expensive pieces of equipment than the water department, which would use a half-ton truck. So the $50 has always been there relating to public works supply. The $100 was there for fire department supply, which is being removed.
Thank you. I guess then the other question, and I think you just answered it, Michael, I was wondering if we did take requests and we did honor them, how was the water going to be delivered? Because was it delivered before by the fire trucks? And if not, how did we deliver it in the past? And how will we do it in the future from now on?
Do you want me to?
Go ahead. No.
Yeah, in the past, very infrequent that the fire trucks had ever delivered water. It was probably before the time when the tanker truck had foam on it. And what we would do is someone who's close to a hydrant, they could potentially run through a hydrant, or someone who's not. There are bulk water suppliers out there that can deliver it to people, and it is a private business that does deliver bulk water.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Now I understand a little better. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any more questions? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the Arts Wall Committee and Mr. Pride.
Thank you, Worship. As Council knows, Penny Mott has served on the Sackville Arts Wall Committee since February 2017, and her term recently expired, though, at the end of October, and she's decided to step away from the committee. So the current committee has asked that Council would appoint Rachel Thornton to a 3-year term effective immediately, which would also expire at the end of October in 2023. She's the current curator of digital engagement at Owens Art Gallery, and she's a Mount Allison graduate, I believe, in 2015. She's also been an artist and involved with our Street Chalk Art Festival. I should also mention that Linda Dornan, who's also on the committee, her term expired October 31st, but she has offered to continue on with the committee. So there will be a motion coming forward next week to Council if you are willing to appoint Rachel and reappoint Linda to that Arts Wall Committee. And finally, I'd like to take a second just to thank Penny Mott for her commitment to the Arts Wall over the past 3 years. She's been very helpful when we go through the nomination process, and wish her all the best. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to Fire Department training equipment and Chief Bowser.
Your Worship, just before you move on, I think Councillor Finney had a question on that item before we move.
Councillor Finney.
Thank you, Ron. I was just going to ask Matt exactly how many people are on that committee?
There's 3 members from the public, and then there's normally an assigned councillor as well. But Joyce was Councillor O'Neill was the assigned councillor at the time, so there's an empty spot there right now.
Okay, so if Penny's leaving, we're replacing with Rachel. Linda, we wish to replace. Who's the other person, the other third person?
Yeah, Kelly Matitall.
Okay, thank you. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Chief Bowser.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of Council. As we continue to design and plan our training facility, one of the training props that was brought forward to our membership was a forceful entry door simulator, which allows our members to train and enhance their skills on a forceful entry door operations of inward, outward swings, as well as left and right, and also hinge pulling operations. The simulator door is made of heavy steel, which weighs approximately 1,400 pounds, and it'll withstand multiple forcible entry operations, which includes settings of commercial and residential use. The Firefighters Association is committed to the ongoing investing into the training facility and are proposing to fund this training simulator in its entirety of $7,900 plus HST. And the funds were coming from the Sackville Volunteer Firefighters Association, which have been raised from different fundraising efforts over the last number of years. And I would again note that this will be coming forward of a motion of council at next Monday night's regular council meeting of December 14th. And I would certainly be happy to entertain any questions that council may have.
Are there any questions for Chief Bowser? So I take it that this is, there's no funds from the town budget coming for this?
That is correct, Your Worship. All from the Volunteer Firefighters Association.
Thank you. Councillor Evans.
Thank you. I just wanted to, and that's the point I was going to make, is that the town does provide the fire department with all kinds of really nice equipment, and it is the envy of other municipalities. I had the pleasure of touring the facility with members of Wolfville Council, and they were, let's just say, envious would not have been too strong a word, but I've been really impressed lately when some of these cool things that we're purchasing are being paid for by the Firefighters Association themselves. That's having skin in the game, and I know as an employee, when your employer buys you nice stuff, it's a real motivator, and I assume that one of the reasons why we don't seem to have a problem staffing the fire department is because they're acquitted or they're equipped so well. So I'm pleased that we're continuing this tradition, and I'm very impressed that this particular item is being paid for by the association. So congratulations to you guys.
All right, thank you. Are there any more questions? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the end of the year finance motions, and Mr. Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as we approach the end of the year, of course, there's some things that have to happen. The most important one is to provide for year-end reserve fund transfers. So as noted in the report, each year we transfer net of reserve funds based on our current year financial analysis. 2020 will likely allow us to make transfers general operating, general capital, and utility capital reserve funds. So utility capital reserve fund, it is looking like we will be able to put the full $160,000 into the reserve fund that was budgeted. The estimates are still being worked on with regards to that, but it is looking like that, even though we were in a position to give $40,000 back to the residents through the not charging the sewer treatment early in the COVID. We will also be looking at transferring operating to general operating and general capital. Those numbers are currently being finalized. It is a lot of work. Every account item has to be estimated. As we still have 3 weeks left in the year, there could be some major incidents that affect things or not. So we do leave a cushion when it comes to that. But the estimates are still. My goal is to have things ready for my report that would be Wednesday, Thursday this week with the final numbers. But overall, I believe we're in a really good position with things that, for example, just pulling, pardon me there, so. For example, things that capital projects that didn't go forward in the year. There were some capital projects that didn't go forward, so there's money available there. There's some staffing that didn't get filled right away, so there's some savings there, and there are a number of other things that result in savings. So there will be transfers into the operating and capital reserve, and I will explain that further hopefully in my report, if not at a supplemental to council before the meeting on the 14th. So that's with regards to year-end transfers. So there will be motions on those. There was also the Safe Restart funding, which the province has initiated. So funding was announced for municipalities. Motion is required by December 31st for current year for additional COVID cost, COVID-19 losses, less the operational savings related to COVID. So again, we're also working on those numbers. We're getting close to finalizing those numbers and having a submission that we can send to the province. Unlike, I guess, a lot of a lot of provinces in Canada. The money was allocated to the provinces, my understanding through press reports and things. The money was allocated strictly based on population. So there was a number, it was divided amongst the provinces by population. Most provinces then distributed that money to municipalities by population. New Brunswick has chosen not to, and have chosen this method where municipalities have to defend their additional COVID cost and the COVID losses. And I think in the article I read, it was made clear that there may be some that get higher per population, some that get lower in New Brunswick. So it does make it much more difficult of a task, and I'm not sure if it's going to be first come, first serve, if it's going to be wait until all submissions are in at the end of the year and then numbers. There wasn't a whole lot of guidance in the letter as to what was covered and not covered, so we are putting together some numbers. Again, I hope to have that for my council report. If not, again, it will be subject to a supplemental before the 14th of December.
Thank you, Mr. Beal. Are there any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. The Public Works Gate, Mr. Acton.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. As council was probably well aware by now, there was a break and enter at the Public Works facility where the town utility truck was stolen out of our Public Works garage. As a result of that, the Engineering and Public Works Department evaluated the security at our Public Works facility, where we're looking to upgrade the Public Works main compound gates to a cantilever sliding gate system that will allow us to keep the main gates locked during non-operational hours over the wintertime mainly. The existing gate system creates challenges in the winter months getting the gates closed and locked properly due to snowbanks and icy conditions. So we're looking to upgrade the current gate system to this new cantilever slide gate system, which will allow year-round operation and locking of those gates without any issues of navigating around snowbanks and potential winter conditions. We also evaluated the fence along the front of the property, which would be kind of the northeast end of the Public Works compound. The gate the fencing stops shy of the drainage ditch there, so we're looking to extend the fence along the front of the property on the northeast corner all the way over to the large drainage ditch to prevent it or at least make it much more difficult for anybody to get into the compound off of the main road. In doing so, we reached out to Eastern Fence and Dean Wellington and Son are the two contractors in our area that do this type of work. We received quotes from Eastern Fence for this, both the gate and the fencing, in the amount of $16,646.25, HST included from Eastern Fence, and Dean Welling at $12,442.14, HST included. A few of the other things that we evaluated, the audible alarm system, which is a high piercing audible sound, was for whatever reason was not functioning properly. That has been repaired. The back door that they broke into and pried open, that door has been upgraded with a deadbolt as well as the regular lock. And a few other things that we're considering and may bring forward to council at a different time is camera for the Public Works area. So cameras in the various locations. And we're also looking at GPS systems for the vehicles as well, which would obviously would have tracked that vehicle down right away. Those are just a couple things that we're also looking at, but for this work, this is kind of work that we wanted to look at trying to get done right away. And then these other things are things that we would look at in the future. As far as the budget goes, we have, as part of our 2020 capital budget, we do have the facility upgrades of $40,000, and there is money available there. I believe there was money that was utilized for the system within council chambers, that if council remembers, there was a lightning strike that blew up some of our equipment, or we had to get that repaired. I think that was in the vicinity of 23,000, Mike, if I'm somewhat accurate there. There was also a bit of work in the fire bay because of the glycol leaking. I think there was 6,000 spent there. So there is money available in that, still in that upgrade fund to fund this project. And I would be looking to bring a motion forward at next regular council meeting to award the work to Dean Welling and Sons in the low price of $12,442.14, HST included. I'd be happy to answer any questions, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Acton, are there any questions? Councillor Finney.
Dwayne, I'm not sure what a cantilever system is, but you have been to the shop where I used to work at Mount A. That fence they put in there where it's sliding on wheels, is that what they call a cantilever system?
I believe it is, yes. It's so it doesn't you don't have to bring the gates in. It's just on a sliding mechanism, and you pull it shut. So there's no snowbanks you have to navigate over or around to close the gate.
Well, I just want to say I think it's a great idea, and I'm glad that somebody decided to come up with that, because I can say it certainly worked at Mount A. When the swinging gates, they were a pain in the you-know-what in order to try to get them closed, or open for that matter. So I think it's a great idea. Thank you for bringing that forward.
Thank you, Councillor Finney. Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I guess it's good to see that the whole facility is being looked at in regards to security. I know you've mentioned cameras, and I think that would be a big plus, and hopefully we'll see something come forward on that. Just kind of wondering about lighting in that general area itself and the compound and around the building. I'm not sure if staff are aware, but there was a theft again at the business next door, and it's the second time, and it seems to be a very dark area. And I'm just kind of wondering about if the lighting was looked at as well as in regards to security.
We have yes, we have looked at lighting. We have been upgrading the lighting. There's I think a 3-bank of new LED lights that were put on the front of the building. I know there's at least one on the side and several at the back, and those also will be looked at as far as updating them to 1 LED so they're more efficient, and 2, obviously they put off more light. The difficulty as it is behind the building, you can have all the light you want, but if no one can kind of see in from the front, it makes it difficult. But it is something that we have been working on, is improving the lighting as well. So yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Finney, do you have another question, or you just left your hand up? Okay, then we'll move on to the last item on the agenda, rental space for community groups, and Mr. Pride.
All right, thank you, Your Worship, members of council. Last month at the council meeting, council had requested the staff take a look into what could be done to help in providing free space for nonprofit community groups to be able to run their recreational programming during the pandemic. As was alluded to earlier, schools, Mount Allison, a lot of the church halls and other facilities are closed to the public right now, which has really limited the available space for these different nonprofit organizations to be able to run their programming. As far as town facilities go, we really have 3 spaces that could potentially be used for programming. The Civic Center, of course, Bill Johnstone Memorial Park, and the Visitor Information Center. So we compiled a few different considerations that council should keep in mind when you're making your decision. So first of all, financially, the municipality could lose up to about $10,000 in potential lost revenue based on rentals in 2019. So that's about $10,000 that was paid by user groups to use our facilities in 2019. But you should also keep in mind that some of these groups aren't operating anyways because of COVID. So those rental expenses may not be completely accurate, as some of those groups probably wouldn't be renting the space anyways. For example, minor hockey renting the space for a team party or something like that wouldn't be happening right now. Second consideration, every time that a group uses a facility, that space would need to be thoroughly cleaned. So regardless of which facility it is. So essentially that would limit the number of users to probably one group per night or even over an entire weekend, making it difficult for for the user groups to have a consistent schedule. And it would also further affect our already quite busy custodial staff and civic center staff, who already have a lot of cleaning requirements, additional cleaning requirements because of the pandemic. Third consideration, there's also going to be an increased risk of transmission for staff and residents. So by offering space to encourage more gatherings, there is some risk involved. Right now, we only are using the Civic Center as a programming space, and it's primarily been reserved for town-operated programming, where we have complete control over the operation of the program and the odd special request here and there. Fourth consideration would be that in order for a user group to maintain proper social distancing in our facilities, the number of people who could actually participate in the programs would be fairly small indoors. For example, the Bill Johnstone Activity Center, they could probably only fit, I could barely fit 6 summer students in there this summer, and they were sitting in one spot for their program, so it'd be pretty difficult to put any more than half a dozen people in there. Even in the Civic Center, if the kids are moving around quite a bit and stuff, there's not a lot of space for them, so that would be a potential hindrance for groups looking for space. And finally, at the Civic Center specifically, once hockey games are able to resume, and there was one there tonight, the lounge area would no longer be available to user groups because the canteen would be open. So that hockey game schedules tend to be relatively inconsistent. And so if a group was looking for a weekly meeting space, the Civic Center may not be able to accommodate that. So of course, one final point is that this is only really relevant when we are in the yellow stage of the province's recovery plan, because there wouldn't be any indoor programming if we were in the orange phase like we were yesterday. So that's really it for that report. Right now, we're just looking for any further guidance from council, and if you were interested in us bringing a motion forward, we could draft something next week. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I know when we discussed this previously, the COVID-19 task force was brought up, and I'm wondering if staff reached out to them to see if they're already dealing with this type of request coming from community groups that have lost access to space to do their programming in. And also, is there, and I believe there is in some circumstances, some funding available through either federal or provincial government in regards to helping with some of these groups to be able to do their programming with rentals, etc. So I'm just kind of wondering if we've gone down that road in regards to the task force, and maybe they have some input that they could provide.
Well, I sit on a few of the task force subcommittees, and it has come up in the physical health committee, and I believe in the youth committee as well, maybe even the mental health one, to be honest with you. So it is something that's come up fairly consistently. As far as federal funding goes, I don't know that. I mean, there's always funding available for nonprofit groups looking to promote, especially physical activity programming. The province has funding as well. I'm not sure that paying for the space is necessarily the issue so much as the size of the space in this instance, as well as our ability to clean the space after it's been used. I know there have been a couple groups that have reached out to Jacqueline at the Civic Center about possibly running their program in there. And and she has passed along the user agreement to those groups, and I'm not sure that she's heard back from them. So, I mean, there could be some cost inhibitors there as well, but I'm not really 100% sure. But we have definitely had, I mean, there's definitely groups in town that are not running because they don't have a spot to run.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I got a question. As I read your report, I guess the bottom line is you don't think we really have enough space for proper social distancing and enough space to accommodate a group of any reasonable size, correct?
Yeah, it would be difficult. The Civic Center probably has, well, I mean, it does have the most space, but then once you factor in the inconsistent schedule with hockey games, it would be pretty hard to be able to offer anything consistent there. Todd might be able to speak to this more than me. And then the other option, space-wise, would be the VIC. But right now, the additional cleaning requirements that would go along with that. So if we had somebody in there, every night of the week, that might be a bit of a stretch for our staff.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Finney?
I was going to say, Matt, is the reason possibly also why the places where they used to go before, is the reason they're not being able to get there or be allowed to use it now is the same problem? It's not big enough, and also the increased cost of cleaning, which is similar to what is our problem. So would that be some of the problems as to why they don't have a space?
Yeah, I would say that just about every point I've made here is exactly why these other facilities aren't opening up as well. I mean, the schools in particular, there's so much that they're not willing to have the additional risk of having outside people come in the evening right now and potentially contaminating the hallways or a doorknob to a bathroom and putting those children at risk. So we're in a very similar situation where I'm not convinced that we'd be able to keep up with the cleaning requirements to be able to offer something consistently week to week for a group.
Thanks, Matt. You answered my question. Much appreciated.
Sure.
Thank you. So at this point, you're just looking for guidance on the part of council. Is that correct, Matt?
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, if council really feels passionate about us trying to figure out a way to make this work, then staff's more than happy to look into it further. It's totally up to you guys.
Okay. Councillor Evans.
Yeah, when this was first brought up, especially in the context of us, our net, the net financial effect on the town of COVID had not been as bad as we feared. And so we were in a position to do something. So when not-for-profits are hurting, my first reaction was to be sympathetic. On thinking about it, I was saying to myself, similar to the point that Councillor Finney just made, is that the reason they can't access the space they used to get is because of COVID restrictions. Those restrictions apply everywhere. So it would only be places that were essentially exceeding COVID restrictions. So for example, if they used to use space at Mount A and Mount A was not allowing people from town in those buildings, that would apply. Similar to, I think, what's happening in the schools. So I'm not sure if there are many groups that would be small enough that could use this. But what I don't want to do is not provide an important service to people because it's inconvenient. Like it's our convenience is not the motivating factor. So if there is a way that a group could use our facilities, and it wouldn't be unreasonable for us to not provide it for free. I mean, we're not in the business of doing it for free, but as I said last month, if the problem were money, then we might consider that. But the problem they're telling us is they were prepared to rent the space before, but they can't get it now. If they were to rent the space from us for what they were paying before, would that help alleviate some of the cleaning costs? I don't want to say no too easily, but I am less inclined to do this just because of the logistical challenges you've presented.
I mean, yeah, the other option that you could potentially think about is is we could present a motion that would allow managers to look at it on a case-by-case basis, and if the schedule works for us and for the user group, then great, but if it doesn't, then it just wouldn't be able to happen. So there's that option as well.
Okay, Councillor Butcher.
As the person who brought this forward, I thought I should clarify a couple of things. Councillor Evans, it was sort of related to cost in that when these small user groups could use the space at the schools, my understanding was it was free or practically free, and our space is not. And part of that reason was to not undercut smaller community groups that were trying to make a bit of money from renting spots. So our rental spaces were higher so as to not undercut them. What happened after was when operational plans for schools or other community places like churches did not allow for that to happen there, then those places were left without a spot that they could afford to rent. I know, speaking as someone who works in preschool with an operational plan, that the cleaning is all encompassing and not at all what I signed up for when I planned to be an educator. So I completely understand how the cleaning can be really a factor in planning and deciding this kind of thing. But I like what Councillor Evans said, or Mr. Pride said about maybe on a case by case basis. So saying that, the Jonc 2 room could only accommodate up to 7 people and would only be available on these certain nights or something like that, so as not to over exceed our capacity to help, but to still be able to help some. I don't know, that's kind of the thought I have. I hate to think of us just not helping at all.
Okay, Mr. Burke. You're muted, Jamie.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. I guess we just to pick up on Councillor Butcher's point, I mean, we, the staff, generally don't like saying no. We tend to look for solutions to problems and work with community groups to make innovative things happen. And I think we've done that since the start of the pandemic came. I guess one of the challenges, I guess, with dealing with things on a case-by-case basis is that it means that we would then be kind of picking and choosing what would work depending on what's available at a certain time. So, that does put some added stress and pressure on managers who will be dealing with these user groups. So we generally want to treat everybody the same way, which is why we have user agreements which regulate our facilities. So it would be, to a certain degree, our department heads sticking our necks out to kind of work with, whether it be scouts or Girl Guides or, I don't know, gymnastics, to try and find a facility or space that may be able to be made available for, a reasonable price, whatever that definition of reasonable would be. So it's not an easy one to stick handle when we know that all of the other facilities are currently closed. So I guess what we're looking for is if there's a strong, desire and will from council tonight, we'll reconvene tomorrow at our management meeting and put our thinking caps on and hope to come back to council next Monday night with something that we think would be a reasonable solution. But for, the points noted, as Mr. Pride has raised in his report, it's not an easy one to juggle, under the current situation, for sure.
Councillor Finney?
I was going to say, as a matter of fact, I don't mean to be mean or anything, but the other groups, the groups that they were renting before, the people said that they would prefer they didn't use their facility because, as I said, it could be due to the increased cost, but also the safety of the kids and stuff. I think we need to keep in mind the safety of our staff, as a matter of fact, when we're turning around and doing that. And the other thing about picking and choosing, then you're going to have one group saying, how come you got it and how come we didn't get it? And so you're going to have an internal battle there. And that's like Mr. Burke said, you're going to have those people mad at us no matter what. If we say yes, oh, well, we're trying to find a way. But if you turn around and pick and choose, then you're going to have them mad at us again for that. So, and if we don't do anything, And not that I don't want to, I would love to, but we have to take those other factors into consideration. We have to be careful because, I mean, then they're going to be mad at us no matter what we do. And so all around, is it the right thing to turn around and find a way to do it and take the risk of our staff? They're concerned about their staff in other places. So it's just some thoughts that I thought I'd like to put out there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Michaud.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I guess the way I look at this is the fact that, you know, it may not be the municipality that is foregoing something or putting something down money-wise or making concessions. I think we should be working with other organizations to help these smaller organizations find the means in order to be able to continue on with their programming to allow them a sense of normalcy during these times. I did recall seeing something in regards to an emergency support fund through Cultural Heritage Canada for organizations with COVID. And I'm just kind of wondering if that's an alternative for some of these organizations who don't have the funding to pay the full rental fee for maybe one of the municipal areas. The other thing is I think that the task force should be engaged in this, and I think they should be playing a bigger role in helping kind of guide some of these smaller organizations. That's what they're there for. They've been bridging a lot of gaps. They've been doing a lot of good work, and you know, maybe there's some options there that they can be bringing forward. And I would like to see us and maybe staff engage them more or connect the organization that approached the municipality in regards to their concerns, and connect those two groups together and saying, you know, what can we be doing here to help mitigate this for this particular organization that reached out to us.
Okay, thank you. I think at this point we're edging dangerously close to debating this in a forum we're not supposed to be. I don't detect at best a lukewarm acceptance of that we should be doing something about this. I think there's two ways we can go. We can either just, with consent of council, say, just we can't do it. It's not reasonable. Let's just drop it here. Or we can have staff generate a motion that would be something they could live with, and then we can debate it next week and either vote it up or down. So I will leave it to. Does anyone have any strong opinions either way?
Deputy Mayor, I don't think we're debating this. I think staff is looking for direction here, and I'm providing comments. I think that's what folks.
I wasn't referring to you specifically. I was just.
No, and I know you weren't, but I'm just saying I don't think there's a debate happening here. I think that sometimes you have to have discussion in order to get consensus in order to move forward, and it doesn't always take a motion.
Councillor Finney.
Worship, Your Worship, I was just wondering, could we take a vote on it to decide as to whether we want to do this or just turn around?
A formal vote. We can do a sort of a straw poll.
That's what I mean, a straw poll to say, do we want to go forward with it or do we want to just say no?
Okay. Mr. Burke? You're muted again.
Sorry, I was concentrating on getting my hand down. Your Worship, I think what we would suggest is, why don't you let us kind of regroup in the morning, and we'll take the comments and considerations that were presented tonight, and we'll go back to the drawing board as a team tomorrow and bounce some ideas back and come back if we feel appropriate with a motion for next week. And if we're not in a position to do that, we'll let you know why we've chosen not to advance a motion.
Okay, that sounds fair.
And that'll either come through the Parks and Facilities liaison group or through recreation programs and events, public property and facilities, or recreation programs and events. One of the two. Okay.
That's great. Thank you. All right, that brings us to the end of the public agenda. We now have a question period open to the public. I'll ask people that wish to ask a question to turn their microphones and cameras on, and then turn them off when they're done. Mr. Wark.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm grateful for the question period, which is a new thing for a special council. I had understood that the package that councillors received for this meeting would be available, and yet I don't see it. Specifically, for example, I'm especially interested in the DTI letter on setting speed limits, which would be a first. I've done quite a bit of reporting on the situation on Pond Shore Road, and I'm wondering why, that's my first question, why we haven't received any background information that the councillors received before this meeting.
That letter was is one I wrote in response to Mr. Gautro's concerns about the Pond Shore speeding. And it was sent back to me from the minister from DTI. And we, there was no indication from DTI that it was to anyone other than myself. And I shared it with council just so they could get a kind of update on where we were with that one. I'll say there's still an outstanding letter to DTI about asking about the validity of speed radar cameras. So that one's still out there. But no, we generally wouldn't include that kind of thing in a package to council for a meeting.
But you did include it in the package to council.
No.
So no one has
emailed to council independently a couple of weeks ago.
So no one has seen that letter?
Well, council has, yes.
But why can't I see it?
Well, for one thing, it wasn't addressed to you.
Okay, that's my point. This is public information. It's not a private letter. It's a matter of public concern that has been raised a number of times. And the fact that it's not included, well, I didn't receive any package at all, only what I could see on the screen tonight. And sometimes I could see a full document and sometimes not. I thought, Your Worship, that you had promised that we would, as members of the press at least, have access to the package that special counsel receives before the meeting.
No, what I said was we were looking at various ways to provide more information. And one of the ways we were doing that was to put the bits up on the screen as we're talking about them.
Yeah, which I can see parts of documents. It's very hard to follow the discussion, look at the document when you see only part of it on the screen. So that's my first question. Second question, it's related because it's about disclosure of public information. We're about 5 months from a municipal election. One councillor, Councillor Finney, has been disciplined for a second time for violating the new code of conduct. No information has been released about that, about the details of that. I think voters need to know what happened there, and yet there's no information from council. And I'm asking you tonight, why not?
Again, as I mentioned to you in an email, that is a personnel matter. And out of respect for the privacy of everyone involved, that's how we do it. And I think that is pretty consistent with how every municipality in the province would do that.
I'll just say to you, personnel matters relate to town staff, but not to elected officials. Elected officials are answerable, and all of you are elected officials, are answerable to the voters. And I report to the voters based on what happens at town council. And so if you're claiming it's a personnel matter, I'm saying it's also a political matter because it involves an elected official and not an administrative staff person. I just want to get that on the record.
Okay. Councillor Black, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I agree. And this is something that that we will possibly look at in the next little while. But you're right, Bruce, that this is something that I agree with.
You agree that the package should be available?
No, I agree that elected officials are separate from staff with regards to information pertaining to possible code of conduct violations, that they're answerable to the public, the people that elected them into office. I agree with that.
Thank you.
I'll clarify a bit that under our current rules, we can change the rules to anything we want, but under our current ones, I think I've interpreted correctly. Councillor Evans?
Yeah, that's essentially what I was going to say, is that I would, when Councillor Black said he would like this to be more public or more transparent or whatever, I share that feeling, but it's not about what I want. It's about following the rules. There are lots of things that I hear in confidence that I think the voters should hear about, but I am constrained by the code of conduct. So I can't share that information. So if you're asking us for opinions on what we like, that's one thing, but we have to follow the rules as they exist now or change them. And I, for one, would like to see this changed, and we will work at, or I will work at, trying to convince my colleagues that it's worth changing. But until then, we have to obey them. And at the risk of cutting too close to the fact, that's what we're dealing with, is someone who violated the code. And I think it's important that people know what it's about. I don't like this secrecy. And I agree with you that elected officials are employees of the town, but they're not the same as other town employees. So I would like this to be treated differently, but we have to be very careful that enforcing a code of conduct, we don't violate it. And if we hear something in confidence, in camera, we are not allowed to repeat it. Now, you seem to have a source who shared with you information that he or she thought may have gathered from a confidential thing. I don't know, and you have a right to publish whatever you hear. But it seems to me that that's cutting pretty close to inappropriate behavior on behalf of somebody.
Okay, thank you. Bruce, did you have?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Erica Butler, please.
Hi there. So I just had a few questions, I guess. First of all, I didn't see the item about speed limits for skateboards on the agenda, and I wasn't sure if that, like, you guys discussed something about speed limits and skateboards were also mentioned, and I don't know what that's about.
What that is the documentation for that item was provided as the policy bylaw meeting. The only item we really were supposed to discuss on that was the water issue. And the other ones will come up again, I'm sure, next week when we talk about the report in full.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we'll just have to wait and hear about that next week.
Mm-hmm.
I did have a question about Safe Restart funding. So is that funding only to cover expenses that the town has already paid or losses that we've already incurred? Or does that Safe Restart funding give leeway for the town to plan ahead for initiatives it wants to take? And is this really just about covering losses, or is this about the town being proactive with COVID recovery in the town of Sackville? Do you understand, I guess, what I'm getting at there?
Yeah. Mr. Beal?
Yeah, my understanding of it is that it is strictly relating to three areas, which are additional COVID cost, COVID-19 losses, and then you have to subtract your operational savings, which were directly related to COVID. And my understanding is that, and it is only for the fiscal year 2020. So it's basically, we're mid-December. So it is basically money that will come to municipalities to help them offset their 2020 financial position related to those three areas of COVID.
Right. So, you could take on some additional projects, but you have to take the risk that perhaps there might not be safe restart funding in another 6 months or a year that could recompensate you for that.
Correct. It's entirely December 31st, 2020. And even given that they want the motion by the end of the year, there's still three weeks worth of trying to guesstimate what those costs may be, because there are still bills coming in relating to changes that may or may not be made relating to COVID. So it's a tough undertaking, and that's why I said most provinces funded it strictly based on population back to the municipalities, how they were funded through the federal government to offset so that everyone was treated equal. But for New Brunswick, we have to try to justify these costs and extra costs, and then subtract savings from it that took place.
Right. Geez. The other thing I did have a question about, and I don't know if this is the right place to ask it, but I will. Robert Ingalls mentioned an engagement session coming up for this RP Bell Library, and I believe he mentioned that Mr. Burke was involved in that. So I was wondering if there's any more information like that. He mentioned that was coming up, I think, this week. What's going on there?
Mr. Burke?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Erica, for the question. We provided some posts on our social media sites on Friday advising the public that it was happening. Robert, I guess, formally extended that invitation today. It's on our community calendar. It's on our website. It was included in our newsletter that was distributed at the start of the month. So we've cast the web out as far as we can. It's a virtual town hall where the university's architects are going to be sharing some of the initial thought process around the facility. And really, it's an opportunity to really present that to the public and then try and find a way for some meaningful feedback. So we're co-hosting that session with Mount Allison University.
Awesome. Okay. One more quick question, just regarding the security measures you're taking at Public Works. I was wondering, like you mentioned the gate and how it doesn't close in the winter. Was it indeed closed and locked when the theft of the truck occurred?
Mr. Ashman?
No, it was not. Normally it is. That was the weekend we had the water main break on Queens Road. That same weekend, we had staff coming and going. We were flushing all day Saturday into Sunday. And as a result of staff coming and going, the gate was left open. Normally it is locked, especially in the summertime, or at least up until winter really hits. But it was not locked that evening that the truck got stolen. However, the truck was inside the building. So it just made it easier. Right. Once they got the truck out of the building, it just made it a little bit easier for them to get out of the compound by the gate being open. But normally it is locked. It was not locked at that point in time.
Okay. All right, thanks. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Bruce, did you have another question?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Burke.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I just want to go back to, I guess, a comment made by Mr. Wark with respect to the release of the reports and the timing of those when they are released. This issue has been noted several times now by Ms. Butler and Mr. Wark. We have always indicated that we want to be able to provide information to council in advance so that issues and items and files are not editorialized or there's an opinion piece on the way council should vote in advance of us getting to council first. We have always allowed reporters to visit our council meetings. And in light of some recent comments suggesting that we don't want our special council meetings to be covered, That is not true. There's a context around a conversation that was taking place at our last meeting, and the specific context around that discussion was about when to release reports. So it was not about preventing reporters from covering our meetings. We have a press desk. We have never, ever withheld information when reporters have requested information or asked for additional details following those meetings. So I just want to make sure that our listeners understand what the issue is. And it's literally that. It's about the timing of when those discussion group reports are released. It has been suggested that we could do that under an embargo format where reporters would then be kind of prevented from providing that information to the public in advance. We are looking at a variety of circumstances and opportunities. We're consulting with other municipalities. There are many other municipalities in New Brunswick who provide far less information than the town of Sackville does. So this is the way we've done business over the course of the history of the town. That's not necessarily the way we will continue to do business, but we're not going to make it just a knee-jerk reaction to start providing the reports when people request them. We want to give council the information in advance, and we think that's your right as elected officials to get the facts first. If the media want to follow up with articles on those items that were discussed, that's their opportunity to do so. So in response to Mr. Warwick's question, we are looking at when to release reports. We're going through a consultative process with a variety of other personnel and municipalities, and we'll be able to provide an update on that in the new year.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if there are no other questions, I will entertain a motion to move in camera.
So moved, Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. A seconder?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Black. Question?
Question.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's carried. I'll ask those not involved in the in-camera session to leave the meeting right now. Thank you very much.